As we get ready to do training tonight on church councils and lay leaders, you've got my email address there. You're always welcome to reach out to me anytime. So feel free to do just that. We're talking about church councils. I use that word because, or that term, because that's what the Book of Doctrines and Discipline uses. You may call it something else. You may call it an administrative council. You may call it a leadership team. The last church I served before moving into supervisory ministry, we actually called ours something completely different. We called ours the compass team because that body set the direction of the church. So doesn't really matter what you call it, but the governing body of the church. So we'll get started here. So paragraph 337 in our Book of Doctrines and Discipline kind of sets the hierarchy out. The church conference is always the lead decision-making body for the local church. But typically, for most churches, the church conference, it only meets once a year, typically in the fall, to kind of conduct some business for the church. So it's hard to let the church conference do all the decision making when it only meets once a year. So the church conference empowers a church council to act in between sessions of the church conference. And so the church council or its equivalent, whatever you call it, is kind of the lead decision making body for the church in between the sessions of the church conference. And in the Global Methodist Church, this is important because this is really different from our former denomination. The default method of church governance in our Global Methodist Church is one leadership team. And that one leadership team would cover all the traditional areas that you're probably used to: staff parish, finance, trustees, and the church council, kind of all rolled into one. You could decide if you wanted that leadership team to also do nominations. That's possible. Or you may have a separate nominations team. Some people prefer to have a separate nominations team, but the GMC doctrines and discipline allow for that one structure. And if you're looking for that paragraph reference, it's right there. And I would say we're having more and more churches shifting to the one leadership team model. I would guess the traditional model is still probably the majority. But I would say we're probably getting close to a third of our churches now using the one leadership team model, and I predict that actually will begin to grow. A lot of our smaller churches, it's just hard finding people to fill all those positions and all that traditional structure, and it's a lot easier to create one team. So let me give you some pointers. If your church is thinking it might want to shift to having one leadership team cover the church, it requires a few things. It requires a church conference. The church conference has to empower and create that structure, and your presiding elder has to sign off on it. That's not because we're trying to control anything or stick our nose into your local church. It's to make sure there's good accountability and just to make sure that a small group of people is not deciding to completely change how the church is governed and there's not good input and voting by everybody. So that's why we do that. But that's required. It's really all that's required. But here's what I would tell you. If you're shifting to that model, I would say to you, it requires a lot of really good and thorough communication. You're concentrating authority and power for the church in a much smaller entity. And when that happens, it can make people nervous. And so I would beg you, if you're going to do this, and I don't have a problem with it at all. I actually think it's a good idea. But if you're going to do it, I beg you to over communicate. Once you decide on what your structure is going to be, I would talk about it. I'd spend a month or two talking about it. And you could do e-blasts, you could record videos, you could do a town hall, you could do small groups, you could write, there's lots of ways. You all are creative and you could figure out how to do that. But I would talk about it so much that people are sick of hearing about it. When people begin to say, "Oh, good grief, enough! We've heard enough. Let's do it," then you finally communicated enough. When you're concentrating that much power in a smaller group of hands, you just want to make sure that everyone's on board, and you want to give time for people to worry out loud. I've often found you may have some folks who need to worry out loud, that they'll support you and they'll go along with what you're proposing if you'll just give them an avenue to share their concerns out loud and let them know that you respectfully heard them. So I encourage you just to have a good communication strategy if you're going to pursue it. If you're wanting to talk with some churches that have already gone down this path, we're glad to share them with you. I don't think they'll mind me doing that right now. One model that you'll see often used is you'll have anywhere from like 9 to 12 members of a leadership team. And you'll see maybe 3 to 4 focusing on staff parish, and 3 to 4 focusing on finance, and 3 to 4 focusing on trustees. The whole team would still consider everything together, but if there are specific things that need to be done, it would be that smaller subcommittee that would kind of focus on getting that task done. That's one way. Another way is just to have everyone together and everyone does everything as a committee of the whole. And that's possible too. My guess is smaller churches might lean towards that. Larger churches might lean towards the subcommittees, but we're glad to connect you with some churches that have done that well, if that's something that interests you. So who can be on the church council? The Book of Doctrines and Disciplines says to be on the church council, you have to have genuine Christian character, and you have to be someone who loves the church. And that may seem like a no-brainer, but it's very important. Church council is not to put cantankerous, cranky people who can't stand your church. This is the place to put people who love your church and they want to see it blossom and truly just expand in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. You want these people to be spiritually mature. This church council is not a place for someone who's a brand new Christian. The church council is a place for people who are deeper in their faith, because they may have to make some harder decisions, and having a deeper faith, I think, helps to make better decisions. You want them to be competent. You want them to be people who actually have some skills and gifts, the spiritual gifts of leadership or administration, or uh, perhaps helps or something of that nature, teaching. Those sorts of spiritual gifts are the ones you're looking for. They have to be a professing member. So you can't have a non-member sit on your church council. You have to have a professing member of the church. The Book of Doctrines and Discipline requires at least 8 people. So there have to be at least 8 people on your church council. Can't be any smaller than 8. There's no limit on a maximum. I actually know a church council actually, I served the church. I was the associate pastor of a church 20 plus years ago that had 120 people on its church council. You're going to think I'm joking. I'm not. There were 120 people on the church council. Folks, that was unruly. It was crazy. And so I personally think when you get much more beyond 12, I think it gets hard. I think you just hard to kind of, by the size, keep everyone together and on task and moving forward at the same time, but there is no maximum. You do have to divide the church council into 3 classes, and they should be of 3 years. Automatically on the church council, the pastor is ex officio on the church council. He or she is automatically on every committee in the church. They automatically have voice. They don't have vote, but they have voice. And then if you're in the traditional model, you have to include the chairs of your staff parish, your trustees, your finance. Lay leader is also required to be on the church council, and the lay delegate to the annual conference if you're doing the traditional kind of model of church governance. So what does a church council do? So paragraph 343 in the Book of Doctrines and Discipline is going to be the place to go. As I've shared in other trainings, we have tried to really do a better job of making sure that you can have one place to go to get all the information you need. So everything about the church council is in paragraph 343. If you don't know how to find the Book of Doctrines and Discipline, if you go to globalmethodist.org, you will find the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline on the denominational website. So 343 will guide you. So church council is responsible for, and actually says this in the book, I love it, planning and implementing a plan for evangelizing, and spreading scriptural holiness. Um, we did that on purpose. We wanted to remind the church that its first and primary duty is to evangelize. That may not always have been the case in our previous denomination, but in the Global Methodist Church, evangelization is the primary task. John Wesley told everyone, "You have nothing to do but to save souls." And so that's our primary thing. And so the church council is responsible for making sure there is a plan and implementing that plan for evangelizing. Church council oversees the administration of the church. It should be evaluating the mission and the ministry of the church. It sets the direction. If your church, if you can't remember the last time your church had a strategic vision plan where you had your church leaders get together and say, God, where are you at work in our community, and how are you leading us to join your efforts? Church council should be responsible for doing that. If you have a vacancy on an administrative committee in between the meetings of the church conference, the church council fills those. They also have the ability to do that. Church council establishes a budget for the church. After, of course, finance committee is probably going to prepare that and recommend it, but the church council establishes the budget. Church council makes a recommendation of the appointed pastor's salary to the charge conference. Staff parish is probably going to come up with the salary figure, but they bring it to the church council because the church council is the lead organization in the church. And so they'll make that recommendation to the charge conference. And the church council, of course, when they set the budget, they set and approve the salaries of the staff as well. And they act on all the recommendations from other committees. It's important to remember, especially if you're in the traditional structure, that staff, parish, finance, and trustees, they are all amenable to the church council. The church council is the lead organization of the church. So, the finance committee will come up with a budget, but they recommend it to the church council to approve. Staff parish may come up with a set of policies, a personnel manual, but they recommend it to the church council to approve. The trustees may come up with a maintenance schedule for all the assets that the church has, but they recommend it to the church council, and the church council takes action on it. So all the other committees kind of funnel through to the church council. Church council meetings by the Book of Doctrines and Discipline, they are required to be open. I want to be real clear about that. In fact, all meetings of a local church are required to be open to professing members unless they're dealing with one of three things: personnel issues, legal issues, or contractual issues that require confidentiality. Staff parish always gets to be closed, but the only time any other meeting in the church can be closed is if it's dealing with personnel, legal, contractual issues. For you to close that part of the meeting, there actually has to be a motion to do it. It requires a simple majority vote. And the meeting's only closed for the portion you're dealing with that personnel issue or that legal issue. The rest of the meeting is open. So it's not, we're dealing with contracts tonight, I don't know, to build a new building, and so the whole church council meeting is closed. No, just the part dealing with the contracts would be closed. Everything else would still be open. I encourage you to have a covenant for your church council. I encourage you to have a covenant for every single team that you have at your church. But here's an example of what I mean when I say a covenant. This was the covenant that the church council had at the last church I served before going into supervisory ministry. We would put this covenant on every agenda, and we would actually begin the meeting by praying, of course, but we would also then review the covenant, and we would go around the table and read it out loud. We'd have one person read one part and the next person read the next part. So this was ours. We said we will do our best to show up for meetings and notify the church office if we cannot. We will have the mutual respect for one another and speak the truth in love. That's a typo. It should be, we will have mutual respect for one another and speak the truth in love. We will vote only when required by the Book of Doctrines and Discipline, and instead seek the consensus of the group based on the guidance of the Holy Spirit. It's not a requirement. That was just something we decided to do. We said, you know what? In the Bible, when voting takes place, usually good things don't happen. Voting is an American thing, and I love being an American, very pro-American, but voting is not really a biblical thing. people in the Bible make decisions by the Holy Spirit driving a consensus. So we would say, we're going to try to come to a consensus on a decision. If we can't come to a consensus, we'll take a vote. But we tried to do it that way. The rest of the covenant was we will complete tasks assigned by the team or communicate to the team if we cannot, or we will use our church's, and this is very important, we will use our church's mission statement as the filter for all our decisions. So your mission statement ought to be some version of making disciples. And so when you make decisions, you want to make sure that you're making decisions that actually further your mission of your church. Church council officers. So the officers for the church council are elected by the charge conference. So when the charge conference meets in the fall, they'll elect their officers. They're typically 4. There's a chair, and of course the chair presides over meetings, sets the agenda in consultation with the pastor. Here's one thing I would encourage you to think about. I would, and the Book of Doctrines and Discipline allows this, consider merging the chair of the church council with the position of lay leader. I think it often gets difficult because the lay leader is kind of the chief lay official of the church. But then if you have a separate church council chair, it kind of creates some tension at times because you have 2 people who are kind of leading at the same time. So I would encourage you to consider merging the church council chair with the lay leader position. You ought to have a vice chair just in case, so someone can act if the chair can't, and they should be in a different class from the chair. And then in addition to that, you should have a secretary who gives the notice of the meetings, keeps the records, takes the minutes, and then the church treasurer as well, who oversees the offering, oversees the accounting and the finances of the church, of course, works together with the finance chair and the finance committee. So those would be the officers that you're going to want to make sure that you have. Here's just a possible plan for your church council. Just because I suggest it doesn't mean you have to do it this way, but it's one way to do it. You're required to meet quarterly. You can meet more often if you want to, but the Doctrines and Discipline requires the church council to meet quarterly. So the winter quarter, it's a great time to look at the whole year ahead of you and make sure that all the really big things are planned for. And that way it kind of helps to keep overlapping from happening or different ministry areas competing for space or time or resources on the church calendar. Vacation Bible School is going to be this week. That's an all hands on deck event. We're going to do generosity and stewardship this time of year. We're going to make sure the fall festival is here. The Easter egg hunt is here. Whatever the big deals are at your church. Every church has different big deals, but whatever your big deals are, that's usually a good time to make sure they're not only on the calendar, but you have people in charge of them. You have resources financially to handle them, all those sorts of things. Spring's a good time to kind of look at the administrative tasks of the church. Summer is a great time to look at your strategic vision plan. If you've not done one, I encourage you to think about doing that process. If you have done one, then summer is a great time to review it and see if you're meeting in the targets that you've set or if there are things you need to adjust. And then the fall, of course, you can prepare and adopt the budget for the coming year. And that's also the time of year when kind of the finance committee is getting a budget ready to recommend to the church council. Staff parish is getting salary recommendations ready to send to the church council. Trustees is probably getting a maintenance budget ready for the next year. So good time to focus on finances in the fall. So let's talk a little bit about the lay leader. Some people ask me that why do we have a lay leader? Why does every church have one? So historically, the reason Methodist churches have lay leaders is, back in the 17 and 1800s, we had circuit riders and churches would be put on a circuit. Circuit number of churches varied, and you had one ordained elder that served all of those churches, and they rode on horseback. And you might only see your ordained elder once every month, maybe once every 6 weeks. And so who led the church while the circuit rider was riding the circuit and attending other churches? It was the lay leader. So the lay leader was the person who led the church when the circuit rider was not there. And the lay leader is also the person who preached when the circuit rider was not there. We don't have circuit riders anymore. We've obviously don't have those days, though they've gone by in our history. But that's why historically we have a lay leader. Lay leaders, you're going to want to go to paragraph 342.1. All of the information you need to know about a lay leader is right there, so you can read that. One of the things that a lay leader does is just builds a relationship of trust. You want to pick a lay leader. I always tried to pick lay leaders who had gravitas. These were people who had influence at the church. They were spiritually mature. They were people that I'm probably dating myself. Do any of you remember the old TV commercials when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen? Um, you want the lay leader to be E.F. Hutton. When the lay leader talks, people listen. This is someone who people respect and has influence. The lay leader needs to meet with the pastor. I'm going to talk more about that in a moment to develop a really good spiritual relationship with the pastor. And there ought to be mutual respect with the pastor. It is a disaster when the pastor and the lay leader do not like each other and do not get along with one another. It causes needless tension in the church. It sets up all sorts of bad power dynamics. And I would encourage you to make sure that you elect a lay leader at the charge conference that has a really good relationship with the pastor. And you need someone who's willing to speak the truth in love. You need someone who will, if something's not going right, be able to speak up and say it, and to do so with love. You can't forget the love part. It's no good being blunt if you're gonna just annoy everyone and get everyone upset. You want to speak the truth in love. You want a lay leader who will help keep the main thing the main thing. The main thing is not a thing. The main thing is a who. It's Jesus. You want a lay leader who will ensure that Jesus is always first and foremost at the center of the church in everything that the church does, which means the Great Commission that Jesus gave us to make disciples is at the very center of what you're doing. And so the lay leader helps the pastor to do that. It's kind of natural for our churches to look inward instead of being outwardly focused. Of course, every pastor I know is always trying to help keep their church outwardly focused. One person can't do it alone. They need a lay leader who will stand beside them and help keep the church outwardly focused and say, here's what's going on in the community and the world. Here's where God is working in our community. And here's maybe some ways we could partner where God is already at work and get behind what God is doing to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. Some possible spiritual gifts that would be helpful for in a lay leader. Shepherding is a good spiritual gift for a lay leader. Leadership is a good spiritual gift. Administration, faith helps. Those are all really good spiritual gifts for a lay leader to have when you're trying to figure out who your next lay leader should be. Lay leaders, by the way, serve for 3 years, and they are allowed to succeed themselves once, which means a total of 6. If you have a lay leader at your church who's been serving longer than 6 years, friends, it's time to let that person have a rest, and it's time to let someone else be the lay leader. It's not, term limits are good and they are helpful. And it's not good to have the same person serve in that role year after year after year. And 20 years later, no one can remember anyone but Susie being the lay leader. So after 6 years at the most, but probably after 3, it's time to let someone else take a turn. I would encourage the lay leaders, don't see power as a means of control. Look at power in the way that Jesus did. Jesus modeled servant leadership. Look at being the lay leader as an opportunity to help. You are there as the lay leader, the chief lay official of the church, to work for Jesus. You're not there to work for yourself. This is not you being in that position to get your pet projects through or to get your style of worship in or any of those things. You are there to work for Jesus. And lay leaders ought to be people who are lifelong learners, people who are not afraid to kind of say, what are the best practices for churches in 2024? What are the prevailing churches in the world doing right now? And how do we need to think about what we're doing at our church to see if we could implement some of those strategies to help share the gospel? They need to be curious people who are willing to look at what those are and not just assume that they know them. The lay leader needs to be meeting with the pastor regularly. I promise you, your pastor will appreciate it. If you have a pastor who doesn't want to meet with their lay leader, that's problematic. But they ought to be meeting regularly. I always tried to meet with my lay leader at least once a month. We usually would go to lunch. We kind of had a standing lunch appointment that we would go and just eat together. But they need to communicate regularly. They're just trying to make sure the pastor is supported, being a good sounding board and a confidant, helping to just share the vision of the church and make sure that people are catching the vision and buying into the vision and implementing the vision. Meeting with that pastor is a critical thing for the lay leader to do. This one is very important. I've always tried to go by the rule, and no matter what role I served in, you praise in public, you criticize in private. You provide the pastor with public support. If you need to say something that's constructively critical to the pastor, you do that behind closed doors. But sometimes the pastor needs to hear that. We are not perfect by any means, me at the top of the list. And we need to hear some good, clear, honest, discreet communication. Um, I have always argued to folks, if you're going to bring me a problem, then bring me a potential solution with it. No one wants you to bring them, no one wants to be bought a problem, have it laid at their doorstep, and then the person say, all right, bye, see you later. If I'm going to bring a problem to someone, I'm at least going to try to bring some potential solution. Matthew 18, verses 15 through 17 is Jesus' model for how to deal with conflict. You always go to the person you have trouble with first. So if someone comes to the lay leader and says, I have a problem with the pastor, the lay leader's first response and only response should be, have you talked with the pastor before coming to talk to me? If the answer is no, then the lay leader needs to say, I am so sorry. Jesus requires me not to listen until you have talked to the pastor, you need, or the youth director, or the, fill in the blank. Obviously, the lay leader, we want someone who's willing to pray for the pastor and the pastor's family as well. I've shared in the staff parish trainings. Being a pastor is a really lonely job, even though it may not seem like it would be, but it is. Just trust me. And knowing that someone is praying for you and your family is a big deal. So that kind of gets us to the end of things. Not hard. I'm going to stop sharing and let's see what questions you might have. We'll be glad to answer them. So what questions do you have?
Jay, in the past, the lay leaders in the church would went for training, level 1, level 2 training, and they were good for 3 years, as I remember. What is the global going to do as far as, let's say, someone in the church wants to become a lay servant?
So those are two different things. So the lay leader is the elected lay official of the church, and they serve on the church council and all the administrative teams. You're talking in our former denomination of what used to be called a lay servant or a lay speaker. So we don't have any of those in the Global Methodist Church. We have what's called a certified lay minister. And if you want to read about those, I think it's either paragraph 301 or 302. If you were any of the following in the United Methodist Church, a lay servant, a lay speaker, a home missioner, a certified lay minister, an advanced lay speaker, and I think a deaconess. So if you were any of those things in the former denomination, you are now what's called a certified lay minister in the Global Methodist Church. We will have a process of kind of certifying those folks. We're just not there yet, friends. We're still in this transitional period. I counted today. We had a cabinet meeting today. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We still have 15 appointments that we're working on making. So the appointment making right now is really kind of dominating the cabinet's time. So until we get through that, and we probably won't be through it till about the beginning of the summer, but once we get through all that, I promise we'll have a certified lay minister process. Other questions? I think I see Marilyn trying to speak. You're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks. So the women's groups, we're no longer under the United Women in Faith. And so we're kind of out on our own, doing our own thing. And in our church, we've got maybe 3 different groups that are working not really together. I mean, nobody's at odds with anybody, but it's not unified. And I've been thinking recently, maybe we should be under the headship of what we call our board. We call it one board, our church council. And do you see a problem with the way we're doing it? Do you think I'm on the right track or not?
Sure. Yeah. So I can speak a little bit to that. So, of course, any pastor is always scared to ever tread with the women of the church, because you don't want to run afoul of them ever, 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 ever. So I'll put up an umbrella of mercy as I'm getting ready to say what I'm about to say. In our former denomination, there was obviously a denominational wide group called the United Methodist Women. I certainly had good focuses. Missions was a key focus of it, but it took stances that we would argue are wildly contrary to Orthodox Christianity, wildly contrary to Orthodox Christianity. And so when we started the Global Methodist Church, we intentionally did not bring that over, because we didn't want to go there. And we've really tried to empower the local churches to do what they feel is best. So what I say to folks is, I would do women's ministry under your own umbrella, just like you do youth ministry or children's ministry or men's ministry or seniors ministry for older adults or what have you. And if you're a large enough church to have like a youth and families ministry, I would put it under that, and let them look over your men's ministry and your women's ministry. If you're a smaller church, you might just decide to have a women's ministry leadership team. But yes, I do agree they do come under the umbrella of the one leadership team for sure, because all ministries at the church should, whether it's worship or youth or children or whatever it might be. So yes, I think that should, and I would encourage the church councils to make sure you are doing good women's ministry. That's vitally important. I pray you're also doing really good men's ministry and youth ministry and children's ministry as well. But yes, I think that should be a focus for the church council. I don't know, does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, it does. Is the Global Methodist Church, have you made any progress towards getting, I don't know, like guidelines or recommendations for the women's resources? At one time I heard the word resources. We're getting resources.
I believe there are some petitions that are coming to the general conference that will occur in September. Here's what I would tell you. I would encourage you to go out, when you say resources, if you're meaning curriculum for like women's small groups, is that what you're referring to?
It didn't sound like they were talking about necessarily curriculum. I wasn't quite sure what they were meaning. It was a letter that we got when we were breaking away from the
I'm not sure either. As far as resources go, though, I mean, for your women's small groups, if you have those, there's lots of really good ones out there. Seedbed, if you're not familiar with them, Seedbed is a great resource. Seedbed.com. Seedbed is they're a great resource, by the way, for small groups and children's ministry and youth ministry and confirmation. And I mean, they've just got really good stuff. And they spun off of Asbury Theological Seminary. So, they're very orthodox and theologically sound. They're really good. There's lots of, Beth Moore has lots of good stuff out there for women as well. I'm I love Beth because she's finally said, yes, I am a pastor, which I love, because women certainly can be pastors. So, she for a long time used to say she wasn't a pastor. She said, nope, I'm a pastor. Good for Beth. So, she's got good stuff. There's lots of really good stuff. The only thing I would caution you is just make sure it's Wesleyan. And if it's not Wesleyan, I mean, it's not like you can do stuff that's not Wesleyan, but use it as a teaching moment. So if you're doing women's curriculum that's not Wesleyan and it talks about predestination, well, then use that as a teaching moment to say, this is why we don't believe in that. That's something that Reformed theology believes, not Wesleyan theology. So.
Okay.
Well, Jay, I don't know, Marilyn, are you talking, because we go to obviously Lake Magdalene, are you talking more of like guidelines of regulations and things for women's ministry, having more of an idea of what that calls for your organization versus resources? Is that what you're asking, Marilyn?
Well, I'm just wanting to know what the conference might be offering to the women. And I mean, yeah, I would like to see in Lake Magdalene, just all our different areas of women's ministry. We've got Bible studies that are going on, and we've got what we are calling circles. Jay, you're probably familiar with the old circles from the United Women in Faith. And then we've got some groups that kind of are focusing on activities, but we're kind of spread out. There's no one oversight over, just to kind of make sure nobody gets off in a rabbit trail,
So it sounds to me
logically or any other way.
Sounds to me like it's a good time for maybe there to be a leadership team for your women's ministry at your church, and for the church council to kind of help empower it, and then maybe bring some plan back to them. And I think that'd be a great place for the church council to start.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions you might have?
I have a question. For the leader, we have a new leadership council, which is 12 of us. Do you need to have specific bylaws for the leadership council that spell out a little bit more about, like, if you do have a vote, is it 2/3? Is it, all the little technicalities of actually the responsibilities and what you do? Does that need to be separate, or just go by that paragraph and that's enough?
Nope. You go by the Book of Doctrines and Discipline. Yep.
That's it.
I actually addressed that in the trustees training last night. So it's fine for your church to have bylaws, but they can't go against the Book of Doctrines and Discipline. So there should be some sort of provision in your bylaws that say that if your bylaws conflict with the Book of Doctrines and Discipline, the Doctrines and Discipline trump. Not because we're trying to control you, not because we're trying to insert ourselves or anything like that. We're Methodists, and we've always done things by good order. And that's just who John Wesley was. And so it allows for accountability. And so the Book of Doctrines and Discipline actually is real clear. Everything's a simple majority vote. There are only a very small handful of things that are super majorities, and they are specifically spelled out in the Doctrines and Discipline. So go by what's there, and you should be good.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Jay, I have one question about when you're doing a one church board and then you're closing out the public part to go into your SPRC, which we do after we've done the open part of the meeting. We ask the members, church members, no one that's on the board to, please leave during that part. We don't close that meeting out. Once they leave, we just go on into SPRC. Is that the way we need to do it, and not officially close out that, because we do that every month? That's the way we run our meetings.
Yeah, staff parish automatically in the Book of Doctrines and Discipline meets in closed session. It's the only team that can do that. So it's automatic. You don't have to vote to do that. All the other teams do need to vote to do that if they're closing for contractual, legal, or personnel matters.
So when we finish the main board where people are allowed to be in there, we don't have to officially close that meeting, have them leave, and then open an SPRC meeting. That's what I'm asking.
No,
okay.
You just have folks, when you get to the staff parish stuff, you just ask any visitors or guests to leave the room.
Right. Okay. That's what we do. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything?
Hi, good evening. I have a question in regards to and I apologize up front if this comes across as an ignorant question, but
You're fine.
where does the, pastor's role and the council's role, what, you certainly don't want to handcuff the pastor to do what God's calling him to do within the church, but where does that, is there something set that there's kind of guidelines as to what's within the pastor's, role and what's in the church council's role as far as changing things within the church, or if can understand where I'm trying to go?
Yeah, I think I do. So the Book of Doctrines and Discipline states that the pastor is the chief administrative officer of the church, but the church council is the lead policymaking body for the church. It's not a perfect analogy. Of course, whenever you use a metaphor, it always kind of breaks down, but so don't take it too far. But think of it like the church council is Congress and the pastor is the president, so you have one kind of acting in an executive function, one kind of acting in a legislative function. Again, not a perfect analogy, but the pastor is a part of all those teams, including the church council, should certainly speak up and have a role. But the church council needs to pass a budget. The church council needs to set salaries. Church council needs to set the vision. Pastor ought to be really involved in the vision setting too. There are a few remote things. The pastor worship is the purview, almost the complete purview of the pastor. So, and that's on purpose because the pastor's kind of the chief theologian in residence, and we want to make sure someone who's theologically trained is making sound worship decisions for the church. Make sure you're worshiping in a orthodox way. Church usage has to be with the consent of the pastor as well. So if you adopt a church usage policy, the pastor also has to give consent. There's an important reason for that. This is going to be an absurd example, but the local satanic community says we want to use your church on Tuesday afternoons. Can we rent it? You want the pastor to be able to veto that if someone says, sure, you can do that. So basically the pastor's making sure anyone that's using your space is actually fitting with Global Methodist purposes, not doing something in your church that would violate our doctrines and discipline. So
J. David Evans.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yes, David.
So in the one church or the one committee model under the church council, do you have any example where the pastor is one of the officers, like the vice chair of church council?
No, and they would not be. They're the chief administrative officer, but they would not do that. And here's why. Your pastor is not a member of your church. When your pastor is a member of the annual conference, and so that they are not a professing member of your church, and you have to be a professing member to be a voting member of the church council or any committee at the church. And so that they're a member ex officio with voice, but they don't have a vote for that reason.
Okay. Answers my question. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, so you may say, well, poor pastors, where do they get to vote? They vote at the annual conference. That's where they vote. The annual conference is their church.
All right, good.
Any other questions? All hearts are clear, as the Quakers say. All right. Well, friends, we're going to sign off and let you get back to your evening. If you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint, just email Julie. She'll be happy to send it to you. And of course, as soon as this is over, we'll get it started uploading to YouTube. Probably take 90 minutes or so, but it'll be up there. And if you want to share it, watch it again, watch it with your team, whatever you'd like to do, it'll be there on demand for anyone who would like to see it. So,
Jay,
yes.
where is it on YouTube?
We have our own channel on YouTube. So if you want to search on YouTube, search Florida Conference of the GMC.
Okay.
You'll see our channel, and All the trainings we've done are there. Church council, trustees, finance, staff parish, they're all there. The keynote talks from our annual conference are there as well. Some of our folks have wanted to use those with their leadership teams to watch those keynote talks, so they're there as well. We'll add more stuff as we go along, but yep, all right there. We'll post it on our Facebook page too, but I think it'll be easier to find on our YouTube page. Great question. All right. Well, let me pray for us and we'll be done. All right. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time to be together and just think about how to be the church and to have a church that is in good order, because you are a God of order and not a God of chaos. Lord, bless these leaders as they seek to lead their churches. And Lord, as we finish this meeting and go on to what's next, would you help us to do so in glory to you? Would you give us a good night's rest? And tomorrow, would you help us to be ready to serve you in whatever ways you call us? We ask all this, Jesus, in your saving name. Amen. All right. God bless you. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.